Is this thing going? It is going. Holy smokes. Hey, this is number one of the today's healing highlights. Looking back at myself backwards. Anyway, looking back at my day, the healing highlight for today, I've got a healing practice. I do a lot of energy work, tracking how the brain and nervous system move energy and information up and down through the whole thing. And whenever the brain or nervous system has a confused picture as to what's happening in the body, then the instructions it sends to the body will be equally confused. In other words, the brain has this moment-to-moment refining and upgrading picture as to what's happening, like a holographic image, right? Because the brain actually has to look down through the nerves. It can't really look through the nerves, but it gets the information from the nerves, and it puts this holographic image together as to where I am in space. Based on the accuracy of that image, it sends instructions down to the body. Now, if you tweak any of that image, I'm just going to scan up here. If you tweak any of that information coming up to the brain, the image, the hologram, is going to shift. And when the hologram shifts, so does the information going down. Now, if you irritate any of those really sensitive nerves that carry that information all the way up to the brain, if you tweak any of those nerves, you're going to tweak the information. You're going to tweak the hologram. So then instead of having a knee that sits right on top of the tibia, the lower leg bone, it sits maybe off to the side, or off to the other side, or out to the front. Same thing with your hips, same thing with your low back. Then you'll shift and twist, and then you start grinding things, and then you have arthritis, arth being joint, itis being swelling, because it ain't working right. So that's my warm-up for how I look at the body very basically. And then when you can actually look at the body, see how the brain is actually, the brain is putting you together in space from moment to moment. If somebody's contorted and twisted and all stiff and bent over, and that's the best the brain can do with your body and with the given energy and information, then you're gonna have trouble. So when somebody comes in today and she says, "Oh man, I've got so much pain, I got a rib out," and she's really certain, she's really clear, I have got a rib out, so certain, so clear, so not interested in dialoguing about it, that she said, last time this happened, the doc said, no you don't, ribs being out, like, they're really painful. She's like, oh yeah, I got a rib out, it is painful. And he said, no you don't. They went back and forth. She was telling me this story. They went back and forth 2-3 times, and then he checks her spine, checks over the ribs, and says, wow, yep, you got a rib out. She says, yep, I do. And so he went ahead and put the rib boat back in, or set it in a place that felt a lot more comfortable to her. So what I did is just had a look. And what, from my point of view, the brain, again, is doing the best it can with the information it has. Now, what stresses you out? What stresses any person out? The three main things that stress you out are going to be stress of a physical nature, stress of an emotional nature, like if you're watching a scary movie and you expect some kind of scary, traumatic thing about to happen, you can feel your body start to tense up, right? Your body tensing up, neck down through the torso, the rest of the body is going to pull your structure out of place. So if you've got any kind of stress lodged in the system, every single time it's going to pull those muscles. It's going to pull your structure stiff and protected. Then when you try to go about your day-to-day business with an underlying background stiff and protected self, you're going to develop problems. That's oftentimes, in my observation, what usually is underlying the problem when somebody just twists and bends over to pick up that little paper clip and then can't get up off the floor for 3 weeks because something blew out. I blew a disc. I've got an inflamed nerve. I can't feel all the way down to my back of my leg. Coming back around to that story of this woman today that came in. So was looking at her, and she was pretty stiff and pretty contorted. based on looking at how the brain was putting her together. The brain loves to move in patterns. Even when you're watching how my hands are moving right now, it's not just my hands or wrists moving, or my fingers spread, wrists moving, elbows and shoulders and neck and mid-back are all moving in a particular pattern. Brain loves to move you in patterns. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm assessing the full body for what kind of pattern is the brain using to move you in space right now, and if it's actually trying to guard itself from some kind of internal experience. Looking at her, there was some kind of internal experience. It was right in this area, and her body was twisting away from it. Just like watching a scary or an emotionally overwhelming movie, that's what it was like looking at how this body was laying on the table. Now, if you take the spine and you twist it like a dish rag, it tends to make the ribs twist also, and they're gonna hurt if they don't know where they're supposed to be, because the brain's telling one thing, the muscles are telling them something else, and they're also trying to guard a particular emotion. It's just too much going on in the system. So based on that pattern that I saw going on with her, all I had to do was a couple little things, a couple little touches, like somebody comes up and sneaks up behind you and taps your shoulder and you go like this. I didn't have any intention of sneaking up and tapping her on her shoulder. I use that example to show you that a little touch in one part of the body that you weren't expecting it can make the whole nervous system immediately orient to that spot. And if maybe you do those little touches that aren't even shoving any tissues for a therapeutic benefit, but the only intention behind those little touches is to wake the brain up to what's happening right there at that moment. And when the brain wakes up to what's happening here and here and here and here, at this particular moment, it upgrades its triangulation, it upgrades its holographic image of where you are in space, and it goes, holy smokes, I put my pelvis on wrong today. What happens if I just adjust it like this? And that starts the ball rolling. That's the first domino, oftentimes in the line of dominoes, that needs to fall down in order for the brain to start an upgrading process of its internal hologram of where you are in space. So you start to unwind this twist pattern, and as this twist pattern starts to unwind based on a little tiny bit of information that it didn't actually have access to a minute before, it starts to move back into you. It sounds kind of strange, but that's what happens. It starts to move back into you. Your breath starts to move into areas, and what the heck, why would the breath move into areas? Why wouldn't it be moving anywhere it wanted to? Well, if you've got a stiff back, which is where the breath goes, because that's where the lungs are, if you've got stiffness and hunching and protecting going on, the breath can't go everywhere that it otherwise could if you had a very relaxed and open and inviting and receptive posture and body. So as that starts to happen, the brain starts to use the breath as an internal shoving mechanism. It'll shove movement up into one part and shove movement up into another part, just like you would clean off the windshield of your car so you could see clearly what's happening. And as that happens, things start to move freely, and then the brain gets a very clear picture as to, wow, and this is what happened with this woman today. Wow, and you could see the grief start to come over her face. And she got a lot more clarity as to, she had a really intense emotional experience that she was about to step into this very afternoon that she was putting behind her. She didn't really want to feel the ramifications of what this experience could mean for everybody involved. And she had a glimmer of it, but she hadn't allowed herself to sit back and actually feel what this event that she was about to walk into really meant. Her body knew. Her body knew exactly what was coming, and it was actually doing its best to keep the full meal deal from her awareness. And it was doing its best. And when it's doing its best, by twisting and contorting itself, things start to hurt. And you start to drain your energy. So you start to feel things like fatigue and specific repetitive chronic pain and itises, sometimes osises, sometimes particular organs, if they're part of that contortion pattern, they don't get maybe the full access to blood or full access to nerve flow because the brain doesn't know exactly maybe where that organ is. It sounds kind of strange, but if you think about it, if you're contorting in there and the whole job of the body is to keep the full force of that pain out of your awareness, part of the information that's going to be kept outside of the view of the brain is the complete feedback from particular organs. Then you're going to be building other long-term problems just because of these tension patterns that are intricately involving full regions of the body. So my recommendation is always get the doctor that's best suited to assess the whole situation in your body. If you need any kind of ologist, have them look at all the right parts. And so we have parts doctors and software doctors. All right, software doctors are going to look at how the brain is moving the body in pattern with a particular software, and the parts doctors are going to look at the heart and the thyroid and the lungs and the bladder and the bowel and all the other parts that are maybe throwing up the signal saying that something's off. I'm a fan of having all of these doctors discussing, because if the part is off, you want to know, is there a problem with the part specifically, or does the part look just fine when you look at it, but it's acting wrong? And if it's acting wrong, maybe it's like your computer. If it's acting wrong, the parts are just fine, but the software needs upgrading, and that then requires a neurologic pattern assessment. So that's my highlight for the day. I'm going to go hang out with my kids. This is my very first FaceTime, not even FaceTime, YouTube Live. Hopefully you can hear me, and good night, everybody.